I'm Wayne Lewis, the farm manager at OSU South Centers. We're continuing our talk from last episode with Jim Hoorman, who's a soil health specialist with the NRCS. Jim, welcome back.
Thank you.
Why don't you start off and tell us, refresh our memory about your background.
Well, I worked for Ohio State University for 25 years, just recently retired, and now I work for the Soil Health Division of the Natural Resource Conservation Service, so I've been doing that for less than a year. But I travel around the country talking to farmers and industry and also NRCS employees, trying to educate them about cover crops and soil health.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and continue on our discussion last episode about the timing of the cover crop planting. When can you plant cover crops?
Just about any time of the year, although it's best to probably do it before harvest or slightly after harvest. Most of the time that's when we're doing it, but we're also doing some interseeding now and actually doing it as early as June. And I even have some guys doing it in the spring before the main crop, so just about any time of the year.
Okay. Well, the last episode we talked about cover crops for after corn and soybeans. What
Sure.
about wheat?
Well, wheat is really beneficial because if we have wheat in the rotation, we can actually gives us a longer growing season. So wheat will come off the first, right around first part of July, and it gives us a much longer growing season. So we can plant just about anything. So our toolbox is wide open. We can plant cover crops for forage production. If you've got livestock, cover crops are great for that. It really helps with nutrients sequestration, so we can really not only produce a lot of nitrogen, but if we've got manure or something, we can actually take up those nutrients with all the cover crops that we have out there. And then it also helps us build organic matter. The biggest problem that we have is if you plant the cover crops too early, they may go to seed, and we don't want them to become a weed. So that's why generally we're doing it end of July, early August. Works the best for most of our summer annuals and those warm season crops that we're looking at.
Okay, and I would assume that certain times of planting seasons throughout the year would require different types or different varieties of cover crop seeding?
Exactly. There's a lot of different, the warm season ones we're going to plant basically in July because they're going to die with the first frost, so they've got a much shorter time period to grow. The cool season ones will survive the winter, and so then we'll have to terminate those. So yes, there's a couple different, both warm season grasses and legumes, and then cool season grasses and legumes. And then we talked about in the last episode, we have legumes, grasses, and brassicas, different mixtures that we're looking at.
What would be some of the termination ways to terminate the cover crops that don't die over the winter?
The ones that don't die, things like cereal rye, we can actually roll, and so we don't have to use a herbicide. But most of the time, we're probably going to use a herbicide, or the other option would be to use some tillage. And that's usually not the option that we like to see because we're trying to build that organic matter, and tillage generally destroys your organic matter and hurts your soil structure.
Okay. Let's talk now a little bit about methods of planting the
Sure.
cover crop seed. I'm sure it relates to when you're doing it as far as after
Yes.
the crop or before or during.
A lot of folks are now using broadcasting. The problem with broadcasting the seed is you really got to have a good rain after that. You need at least an inch, maybe even 2 inches of rain if you're just going to put it on the soil surface. But the other way would be to put the crops in with interseeding. Interseed it with a drill or a planter. And right now, one of the ways guys are interseeding is they're doing it in June. Right as soon as the corn comes up, about the time we're going to put anhydrous on or 28, guys will have a little seeder that they'll put on the back, or some guys are even injecting it right into. That's kind of new, and there's not a lot of research on that yet. Penn State's doing the best job. Hopefully we'll have some more information on that. But I saw some very impressive crops when I was at Penn State. People are worried about, hey, do I use too much moisture? And last year was a very dry year, and they had cover crops in September that were probably a foot tall, and there was only 1 bushel yield difference. So it seems to be like like that's a new way, and I think that's a way that we're going to be looking at doing more of the cover crops, is doing it actually as early as June, interseeding into a live crop.
So how is it that the interseeded cover crops doesn't compete with, say, a corn crop?
A lot of times what we're doing is we're looking at different root systems. So corn is a little deeper rooted. We'll plant some shallow rooted cover crops, and or something that's a legume, not another grass, and they don't actually compete with each other. So kind of the goal is like a pyramid. You want to have a series of roots that are very deep. You want some that are shallow, and you want some that are intermediate. And the same way works for basically the sunlight too. You're getting sunlight at different areas. So you don't directly compete for moisture, you don't directly compete for sunlight. So it actually works out fairly well.
Okay. And then you mentioned broadcasting. Does that work well?
Well, probably one of the ways that the best way is actually to use a drill or a planter. And that works the best. And then the other way is broadcasting, but the problem with the broadcasting is a lot of times you can see in this picture here the seeds are right on the soil surface. You can see the actual roots. They don't get rooted as well. The best way to do it is always to drill it or to plant it. You'll get a lot better results when you do that.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about planting some legume cover crops. Is there anything special about those as opposed to like a grass?
Well, the thing about legumes are they have rhizobia that's associated with that. That's going to help you get nitrogen. So you really have to inoculate them. And one of the biggest problems we have with a lot of this seed is how do we store it, and how much exposure, what temperature is it stored at, and that can have a big impact on the viability of that inoculant. So we really recommend that you put the inoculant on as close to planting as possible. The other issue is temperature and sunlight. The sunlight will actually kill it. So again, broadcasting, it doesn't work as well to broadcast legume seed as it does to drill it. You just get, you want to have that optimal temperature, and you want to keep it away from the sunlight. So it's really important you understand your crop rotation, the time of planting. You want to try to inoculate it right before, and then generally drilling it is always better on our legumes. So those are things that you need to consider.
So is there just a broad spectrum inoculant, or do you have an inoculant specific to different types of crop?
Generally, each cover crop has its own specific inoculant. And one of the things that I've learned over the years is if they say put on, one packet for so many bushel, we've actually talked to an inoculant specialist, and he said buy your inoculant from 2 different sources and put on twice as much as each source. So inoculant's cheap. Put on about 4 times the inoculant, because you got to compete with all those other microbes out there. And a lot of times, if you're not getting nodules, 9 times out of 10, it's because you didn't get it inoculated right. So spend a little extra money on the inoculant, and you'll get your dividends in the amount of nitrogen that you can produce.
Okay. So how do you make sure you're getting a good job done when you're inoculating your seed?
Generally, what we like to do is do it right before we're going to plant. Make sure you get a good adjuvant, something that will stick to that seed, and you can talk to your local dealers, and they can help you find something, and then make sure that all the inoculant's going through the planter. So generally, we want to do that about 24 hours before we're going to actually plant the seed.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the methods of broadcasting some of the seeds. I know you said some of them don't do as well as others, but for the ones that do well is just broadcast. Just cover some of those methods.
Well, the ones that we can broadcast that work the best are the small seeded cover crops. So where there's a lot of seed out there, you've got a chance. On some of these, we can have anywhere from 40,000 to 100,000 seeds per pound. And so those really work well for broadcasting. And we've got a couple different ways that we broadcast now. We're using both the helicopter and the plane, and we're also using these other methods. But with the plane, the nice thing about the plane is it will put it on but sometimes you're going to be seeding the neighbors because they can't pull up right away. With the helicopter, you've got that whirlybird up there. They can get the corners, but the problem is a lot of times the seeds gets caught in the both ways. They get caught in the corn leaves, so a lot of times it doesn't get to the ground. That's why we kind of like to use this next one. This was one of the early ones. Brother Nick Renner from Mercer County started with this one. This was just a detasseler he bought for $3,000, and we're just broadcasting it between the corn rows. So we're going right up and down the corn rows, and we're putting it real close to the ground with those little seeders there on the end there. They're putting it down, and we can get it around. There's a Gandy seeder on the back he put, and we can get it real close to the ground and get some pretty good stands with that. The newest ones now, the next slide shows the high boy applicators, and these are actually anywhere from 90 to 120 feet wide. And when you turn around on the ends, you can't even hardly see that they've knocked any corn down. So a lot of guys are using this. We maybe lose a bushel per acre just on the end rows. But they can do several hundred acres with these high boy applicators. And guys are specializing in this. They'll start putting seed on around the 1st of August, and they'll go through mid-September putting on cover crop seeds. A lot of different mixtures. You can do singles, mixtures, a lot of different variety with these machines.
You talked a little bit about the Penn State's work with their interseeder. Can you kind of describe what that machine looks like and how it works briefly?
Actually, the interseeder is just a cut down version of a drill. They actually interseed. They're putting on their nitrogen at the same time, and then they've just got a cut down drill between each row, putting in a couple rows of cover crop seed, and that works out quite well. They've had some excellent stands, and they're doing a lot of research on what cover crops work the best in corn. I think they're doing a little bit of work in soybeans also, but their biggest thing that they're working on is the herbicides. So we got to be very careful of herbicide carryover. We can have a dry summer, and we've seen this quite often. We'll try to apply that cover crop seed early, and it'll start to grow, and then it dies. And then we can go back a week or two later, maybe we got a rain in between, and all of a sudden we can put that cover crop out, and it just grows like there's nothing wrong. It's because it takes a little while for those herbicides to break down. So we got to be a little bit careful with that.
Okay. I think you got a few slides here for us for some visual effect on what the cover crops look like as they're growing through the season. If we could take a look at those.
Yeah. This was the applicator that we showed, that 120-foot applicator, and this was the Van Tilburg applicator. They applied this in August, and this is what the growth looks like underneath around October. And ideally, the nice thing about this is when you've got a couple inches of cover crop there, they have noticed that they use less fuel. It really keeps the combine up. It helps to dry the soil out a little bit, and if there's any excess nutrients from that corn that didn't get absorbed that year, they will take that up. And you can actually see when the corn gets harvested, you can see some of the strips in the soil where there was extra nitrogen, because the cover crop will be a couple inches taller and it'll be dark green. So the cover crops are really helping us with water quality and absorbing a lot of nutrients. So that's one of the things that we're really looking at.
Okay, and the next slide you've got, what do you have for us in that one?
Well, on this one, the best time to apply the cover crops is when, if we're going to broadcast them anyways, is when we have about 25% yellow leaves. So the nice thing about that is we can actually fly them on, or a lot of guys are even starting to put them in 15-inch row beans or even 30-inch row beans so that they don't run them down. And this would be the time to put it on. And the next slide will show you why we want to do that, is because if we can get that seed on the surface, then the residue will go across the top of it and it'll hold the moisture.
Okay, and then the next slide you got, it's some overseeding, showing the residue from the leaves holding it in place.
Yes.
Is this something after it had been flown on?
Yes, basically either flying it on or we can even use the other equipment. But what that residue does is it helps hold that moisture. We generally need about an inch of rain just to get the seed going. but may take even another inch to have a good cover crop. And again, it kind of goes back to multiple things. We got the herbicide that's still maybe breaking down. You got to be real careful on what herbicides you use, and then you got to have adequate moisture. We generally need about 60 days of growth in order for these cover crops to survive the winter if we're going to plant them in the fall.
Okay, so the question I have is, why is it important to have your seed established before harvest?
Well, the biggest reason is, as I said, with that 60 days, if we take off corn, or soybeans at the end of October, or I should say the end of September, even mid-October, there's not enough time before the next frost. So we like to have at least 60 days, 60 to 90 days of growth, and then we get more roots, we get more organic matter, and it also gives them time to take up more nutrients, because once it gets the sun starts going down in the fall, these cover crops just don't grow quite as well. So we just need to have enough sunlight out there to get them started. That's why we like to get an early start.
Okay, so tell me, is there any advantages or disadvantages to having cover crop seed mixes?
Yeah, we start off with maybe a two-way mix. This is both of these are warm season. The cowpeas give us nitrogen. The sorghum Sudan grass has a lot of roots. We can either graze this or we can get a lot of carbon out of it. So there's a real benefit from having both a legume and a grass, and even adding a third one like a brassica in there. You just get more diversity, you get more types of microbes, and it just makes your soils healthier. You can really see a soil respond the more species you add to a mix. We've kind of found out that 7-way, 8-way mixes probably maximize our benefits, but we have guys doing 10-way, even 14-way mixes, and it just gives a lot of diversity to the soil.
So what would you look for in like the structure of your mixes?
Generally, when we're looking at structure, we like to have some that are tall growing and some that are intermediate. So we want about 20% that are really tall, about 20% that are in kind of that intermediate range, and then about 60% we want low growing. And so that's kind of like a triangle. The reason we do that is because we can get different sunlight from different areas of those cover crop mixes. But also, when we look at the architect below ground, we want that same pyramid. We want about 60% of the roots to be shallow, and then about 20% to be in that mid-range, and another 20% to be very deep-rooted. That way they're not competing. So we get a lot of synergy. 1 + 1 starts to equal 3 or 5 or 7 from the benefits that we get from having those cover crops out there.
Okay, and then, let's say I'm harvesting my soybeans and it's the end of October, after a wet fall or whatever. How late can I plant rye after I harvested my beans?
Rye can be planted, I've had some guys that are planted all the way up into Thanksgiving, even the 1st of December. Now, the problem with rye planted that late is you don't have very much time for it to grow. It will actually germinate at 32 degrees. I've seen cereal rye actually come up underneath the snow, but if you really want the benefits, the earlier you can plant it. We can go as early as the 1st of August, even into July, right after wheat, we can start. Now, one of the benefits to maybe waiting a week or two is then we can put down a herbicide and kill any of those weeds that might come up, especially mare's tail is a big one, and get some of that killed, and then plant your cover crop, and then just let them grow throughout the summer and into the fall. Generally, if we're planting corn, we don't have as much time for that to grow. So then we've only got a few species that we can choose from, and cereal rye is still probably our biggest and best one to plant late. Kale and rape are two other ones that we can go a little bit later also, but it really does cut back on how many cover crops you can go the later you get into the season.
Okay. Well, I'm talking with Jim Hoorman discussing cover crops, and we'll be right back after this station break. Welcome back to our Soil Health Series program. I'm Wayne Lewis, and I'm speaking with Jim Hoorman discussing cover crops. Jim, to follow up a little bit on our discussion about seeding, say an individual farmer is looking to get into cover crop seeding, but he doesn't have the equipment. What are the options to get that accomplished?
There are quite a few custom applicators out there. They're doing several thousand acres a year, and almost every county's got at least one guy that's a custom applicator. So you can look on the websites, and there's lists of people that will do that for you.
Okay. And as you can see, Vinayak has joined us back after the break to finish up some of our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. And I think this went really well. We covered a lot of aspects about cover crops. I know there is a lot of farmers who are interested in cover crops, but they just don't know where to start and how to start. Sure. So hopefully this will help some of our viewers with just getting started, and we'll definitely have some more information on our website as well. I want to bring this conversation back to the cover crop mixes, because we did talk about a couple of mixes, and I know that at different events I have seen farmers trying to get even more and more diversity in mixes. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, probably one of the easiest one is what I call the Buckeye mix, that three-way mixture. It's just radishes, oats, and crimson clover. And this was actually broadcast probably in mid-August through the 1st of September. And you've got one brassica, you got one grass, and you got a legume there. Two of them are going to die out. The radish and the oats are going to die out. So all you have to do is manage for the crimson clover in the spring, and that's going to put on nitrogen, and you can get probably 50 to 75 pounds of nitrogen, and you kill that right before you plant the corn. So that's a really popular three-way mix.
Okay, I like the name Buckeye mix. But
yes.
You got your soil covered. You got your nitrogen source,
yes,
and carbon source,
yes, and the brassicas are going to really help with compaction. So it does everything for you.
That's good. And what is is there any other mixes that you?
Oh yeah, we've got 10-way mixes, so you can add a lot of different things. Add a couple grasses, add some legumes. Some brassicas, but you also can mix warm season with the cool season. So, and one of the things that we really like to add into these are some of the pollinators, things like on the next slide shows like buckwheat and sunflower. So buckwheat, has this beautiful flower on it. The big thing is you do not want to be in a buckwheat field after 4 p.m. Do you know why? Because there's so many bees out there, they get a little ticked off. Their flowers they open it at 9 and they close at 4, and so you don't really want to get buzzed by a bee. But the other one is sunflowers, and sunflowers are very deep-rooted. The buckwheat is very shallow-rooted. They really help us with our natural pollinators.
Wow, I'm gonna try to remember that when I go out to our research farm for sampling next time.
Yeah.
Because do we have buckwheat, Wayne?
Not currently, but we have in the past.
Okay. Well, I'll try to keep that in mind. Okay. So let me ask you this, Wayne. This cover crop mixes, are we using any cover crop mixes out in our research farm here?
We have in the past. Currently we've got one study that's been using cover crops for a nitrogen source for corn for several years, and it's evolved over the years. We started out with just cowpeas, and now we're doing rye, cowpeas, winter peas, quite a variety of different things.
Okay. So
it really has the ground covered to the point that you can't see any soil other than after you plant it.
Wow. Okay. So one of the things that we're trying to do here at the research station is trying to design cropping systems. So that brings us back to our discussion on crop rotation.
Sure.
And I think there is a slide on the crop rotation as well that corn and soybean. You want to talk just a little bit about that?
The real benefit of adding wheat into the rotation is it gives you a lot longer to grow the cover crop. So you can do a lot more diversity. You can do both cool season and warm season, and the toolbox is just wide open. So a lot of times we'll put in 5-way, 6-way, 7-way, 10-way mixes, and this gives us a lot of opportunity because, again, you need to have a minimum of 60 to 90 days. Now with this mixture, by putting wheat in the rotation, you've got a lot longer to grow the cover crops, and we get a lot more biomass out of them.
Okay. So I guess the main option or focus today is how we can use cover crops for better soil health, but looks like there is a lot of more benefits in addition to building the soil health with cover crops. You can really make it economic operation for the farmers and save some money, input cost as well.
We're seeing farmers are reducing their herbicide costs because we're competing with the weeds by about a third. It's cutting back on some nitrogen applications by anywhere from 25% up to maybe as much as 50% just because we're making our own nitrogen, and it's keeping those nutrients recycling. So again, that's kind of why I'll just point to my head. That's why we need to keep the soil covered. Soil's meant to be covered, and it's meant to be covered with live plants. So,
I do like your hat.
yes,
So,
this came from Penn State. So.
Okay, well, this has been very helpful and informative. We do have a couple more topics on cover crops that we would really like to have you back on. There is some other aspects of cover crop management which more relate to pest management as well. So we'll try to find some more time. We really appreciate your time today, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you again, Wayne, for helping us co-host and ask some real-life questions about cover crops. So one more time, thank you for watching this soil health series, and I'm Vinayak Shedekar, and see you next time.